Welcome to our off-grid yurt.
I love living in the yurt. We built it out to be a home, so it's got all the modern conveniences.
The yurt feels extraordinary, and that's something about the round shape, the openness of the layout, and the natural light coming through the dome. I'm Jill.
I'm Charles.
And we live in the woods in Vermont on a hillside that is pretty far from the power lines. And Charles, he's wanted to build an off-grid homestead for years.
I grew up in the country. I have always been a country boy, and living in the city was just a means to an end to get back to the country. Just much more peaceful, and I don't want to be dependent on any incoming services. I just like the independence of it. So we have solar power and a rainwater collection system. Makes you think about your consumption and what you require to live. Just makes you more aware.
So for me, the motivation to move to the country was to be closer to nature, and living among neighbors like bears and bobcats and coyotes and raccoons, and I wanted to hear birds instead of city noises, and I wanted to get to know my backyard.
We came up to Vermont 8 years ago now, and we ended up buying this place on that first trip to Vermont. And starting out, we bought 20 acres, and we had a 5-year plan to work in Dallas and save our money, and moved up here within 5 years. But we ended up buying 10 more acres, and that put our timeline back another year.
So we've been working on the project for 2.5 years. When we first arrived here, we stayed in an RV, and we had to put in the most basic systems like power and water.
My dad and I came down. I set up a small solar array for the RV and set up a water system. And that was just catching water off the canopy of the RV and hosing it over to a 275-gallon IBC tote, and we caught enough water from the rain to keep all of our water needs. And then after the water, I built the solar array, which is a 6 kilowatt, 20-panel solar array on the side of the hill. And then I built the solar shed where I put the batteries and the inverter. And from then on, we had all the power we needed. So on this property, we've never had any kind of outside power to come in and help build anything, so this entire property has been built from solar from the sun.
We're also working on getting a backup generator set up to be able to charge the solar batteries in the event that we go through some bad weather for about a week. We have a 30-foot Pacific yurt that we built from a kit, which is 700 square feet of living space inside.
It's a modern yurt. It has modern materials.
It has a heavy-duty PVC vinyl roof and exterior walls and about a 1/2 inch of bubble wrap insulation with foil on both sides.
And the lattice walls, the rafters, the compression ring, the dome, and all the coverings. We're kind of on the side of a mountain.
So pretty much none of it is flat except the deck that we're sitting on. And that's only flat because Charles took great pains with making it that way.
Yeah, the only flat places on here are man-made. So we ended up having to make a home on pier and beam, basically. It's at the lowest end, or about a foot off the ground, and at the highest end, we can actually walk under the deck. And then the top has got a SIP panel floor on it, which is basically a sandwich of plywood and 6 inches of styrofoam insulation in between it. it's all molded together.
And Charles built a deck around where the yurt would go in addition to putting in the floor of the yurt itself. So that made it a lot easier to raise the yurt. We put up the yurt shell, and that took a lot of help. And anyone who puts up a 30-foot yurt should be aware that they're going to need help, and also ideally scaffolding at the very least, if not more equipment than that.
Yeah, the roof material alone was probably nearly 400 pounds. So it took 4 strong guys a lot of effort to try to get it moved up onto the top of a scaffold, up through the dome, and get it rolled out onto the roof.
Once the yurt was up, Charles was able to do most of the rest of it himself, including putting in the wind and snow kit, which are the vertical supports that go under the rafters, and some cables that hold it all in place.
Hello, and welcome to the Yurt. It's basically 700 square feet, and we like living fairly small. The whole idea of living in a yurt is to have an open concept, as far as I'm concerned. So we wanted to have it as open as possible, but we also needed to have a closed-in bathroom area. Basically, it's the only room that we designed into this yurt. So we have a small bathroom centrally located behind the kitchen, so all the plumbing is all co-located with all the bathroom and kitchen. Part of the reason the bathroom needs to be fully enclosed is because when you take showers, that's probably the single biggest source of moisture in the yurt. So we need it to be closed in and have a exhaust fan, and it pulls all that moisture out and it doesn't get into the rest of the yurt. The exhaust fan idea continues on to the kitchen. We purposely got a microwave with an exhaust fan built into it that could be exhausted to the exterior. When we started the interior build out, I always knew we wanted to make it kind of more rustic. So we went and bought a huge pallet of tongue and groove siding, basically, and ended up using that for almost everything inside. Once the walls were done, we still had plenty left over. So I ended up actually building the cabinets out of that same material. We've got several methods to heat the yurt if we have to. If it's not too cold, we have our mini split, which is a heat pump. And so it'll do cooling and heating. But our main source of heat is our rocket mass heater. You can actually load it like a standard wood stove. And we've built a mass around it out of cob and clay top coat. The clay is not actually done yet. We plan to have a nice smooth surface on it with a linseed oil. And
the idea was to make the entire floor part of the mass. So we take the heat from that mass and distribute it through the entire floor, and that kind of makes it more evenly spread out across the space. And then we also are able to heat the floor using our propane on-demand water heater through a heat exchanger. And the fluid in the floor is a glycol-based antifreeze, basically, so it won't freeze if we have to leave, and we don't have to worry about draining it.
We're still needing to do some refinements on the heat shield as well. It got a little too hot, hotter than we felt comfortable anyway, so I'm going to put a second layer of heat shield. That's what the board in back of the barrel is for. It'll eventually get mounted to the wall, and then it'll get finished with a lime plaster as well, so it'll all look nice. So another item I ended up building with that tongue and groove siding that we got is this pocket door to the bathroom, which I think turned out really pretty. So in the bathroom, we have
It's a regular flush toilet, and the bathtub.
I decided to put a skylight in here, and it's basically right under the dome. So during the day anyway, when you're in here, you don't really need a light on at all because light comes from the dome down through the skylight, and lights up the bathroom pretty well. The vanity I built basically like the lower kitchen cabinets. It's part of an old butcher block table that I cut down and cut a hole in for the sink. And then below that, we built drawers that basically go all the way back to the wall, and then a cutout in the middle to go around the plumbing. It's a lot more efficient use of space than just having an open cabinet. We have our closet area and utility closet area that are all kind of built in behind the bathroom. So this is where we keep all our clothes and our extra storage. Jill has it all nice and organized. And then as we go further back, this is the utility area. This is where we have our 40-gallon hot water tank, which we're able to heat water both with extra solar power when we have it, and we've got our
Propane on-demand water heater.
and everything else. The most of the plumbing infrastructure and electrical infrastructure is all in this area.
All that plumbing, in order to put P-trap, had to go through the floor, and they're hanging down below the yurt. So all of that's very vulnerable to freezing if it weren't enclosed. So I had to build what I call the basement, which is a highly insulated room below the yurt that encloses all of that plumbing and also incidentally gives us more storage space. And then on top of that, I ended up putting a heated cable around all the plumbing that would have water in it and hopefully keep everything from freezing quite efficiently.
We were able to hire out the installation of the septic system before we ever arrived. And that turned out to be pretty crucial because you have to have a septic system on your property before you can reside on it in Vermont. It made it much easier to live here in our RV because then we were able to just dump our waste from the RV into the septic system and then also plug the yurt plumbing into it at a later date.
When you do your permitting in Vermont to get your septic system, it includes a permitted well for your water. We chose not to put the well in and chose to do a rainwater collection system instead, which is legal. And in hindsight, we are super, super happy that we went with rainwater collection. Especially in this area, we have neighbors who have, if we have drought for any length of time, that their wells either go dry or become very reduced in their capacity. So rainwater collection was a very, very good choice.
So our yurt has gutters on the roof to collect the water and 3 cisterns that are buried underground next to the yurt. And there's a pump that brings the water up into the yurt for our daily use.
So now we've got 4,500 gallons, and when it's full, we should be able to go 4 months.
In our climate, you have to freeze-proof every part of the system. So for us, that meant burying the cisterns underground. And because it wasn't safe on the hillside to be able to maneuver a tractor, we ended up burying the cisterns by hand with shovels over the course of about 5 months. And that was a very labor-intensive project.
The yurt is a beautiful place to live, a comfortable place to live, and it was also meant to be a fairly inexpensive thing to build because the yurt itself, the kit from Pacific Yurts, was approximately $30,000, which is cheap house. But when you consider all the other things, the systems we had to put in, it turned out to be relatively expensive for a 700 square foot dwelling.
It was totally worth it, but it's not a very cheap house.
So yeah, my guess is we've got around $100,000 in the completed structure. That includes the interior appliances, the lumber for the platform, and the SIP flooring.
And the composite decking and the off-grid systems. Another reason to build a yurt is how quickly you can put it up. On the one hand, that was true. It went up in 3 days, but finishing out the yurt in the way that we did has actually taken quite a long time.
It took a little less than a year and a half. We could have moved in sooner, but we were comfortable in the RV at the time, and why move into a construction zone?
So living with minimal expenses on our own land and being able to maintain the property ourselves has freed us up. Back when we lived in Dallas, we spent all of our time, it felt like, working and commuting. Charles had a demanding job, and I had several jobs that I enjoyed very much, but I probably had too many jobs. And part of that was because we were saving money toward this specific goal.
So we are debt-free and plan to remain that way. I mean, our regular expenses are groceries, gas, insurance, taxes, propane. That's pretty much what they consist of. So it's very freeing. We live out here in the country in a beautiful home with no real urgent requirement to make a lot of money. It just feels very good.
So it's freed up Charles to be able to build our home full-time. But for me, the goal was never to quit having a day job. That was just a consequence of moving. So for example, I've had seasonal work, I've had part-time work, I've had volunteer work, jobs that I really enjoy with end dates and breaks in between. I wouldn't be able to do that if we had more pressure to keep bringing in a steady income. Another thing that keeps me busy is our YouTube channel. We've actually been documenting our home build since back when we lived in Texas, and it was still just a dream that we were working toward. It's a lot of work, and not that many people have discovered it yet, but it's pretty cool to have the whole story laid out. It really gives us some perspective on how far we've come. One of the challenges of moving to a rural location where we don't know anyone is plugging into the community and building a support system locally, finding friends, building a professional network. Those things have been a challenge, I think, even more than we thought they would be. And one of our most surprising challenges was trying to keep the yurt livable in the summertime. Because of the skylight dome on top, the yurt warms up like a greenhouse.
So we ended up putting in a small mini split for air conditioning, and that works really well. We've got solar that can handle it. Probably the next steps will be really trying to build out the landscape, get in fruit and nut trees, and possibly build some garden areas, try to make our outdoors look as nice as our indoors. And we're doing a 160 square foot covered porch around the front door, and we'll have a nice covered area when we come in.
When we originally purchased this property, our original intention was to build an earthship, but that did not turn out to be a very practical thing to do on our land with our limited budget.
The yurt was always meant to be a temporary, permanent living situation.
So we are not sure how long we'll be living in the yurt. There's a possibility that we might try to build a passive solar home on the top of the hill, but it depends on whether we find long-term sources of income to continue building other structures. But so far, living in the yurt has been really pleasant, surprisingly pleasant, and it feels like home.
Subscribe to Exploring Alternatives and check out our playlists for more videos like this. You can also follow Charles and Jill on their YouTube channel at Over the River and Through the Woods. Thanks for watching.